Earlier today, Cyberpunk 2077 got a new update. Patch 2.12 is largely going to be a bug-fixing update. It'll address many of the bugs that came from patch 2.11, several of which were honestly huge. This is a game-changing update for some of you. And even beyond that, this will address some of the longest-standing bugs in Cyberpunk 2077, although unfortunately, there are still certain issues that remain unfixed, and some fans are getting pretty frustrated about that. The update itself was about a 2.5 gigabyte download for PC users, but much larger at nearly 25 gigabytes on consoles. The size reflecting the amount of content you need to re-download on consoles. And one of the first changes of note from this one is to Sonic Shock. Sadly, no, Sonic Shock still does not prevent tracing, but instead, CDPR updated the description of Sonic Shock to make it a lot more clear as to what it actually does. So from tiers 3 to 5, there's a new entry on the description saying, quick hacks against the affected enemy will still initiate trace progress, but do not increase it. The tier 2 variant saying basically the same thing, but it still does increase trace progress. It seems like this was really just added to make it a bit more clear as to what the actual purpose of Sonic Shock was, and frankly, I didn't even realize it had this much functionality because of how clunky it is to actually use. But basically, when you quick hack an enemy and upload Sonic Shock first, the follow-up quick hacks will not increase this trace bar at all. The trace bar will still initiate, Sonic Shock no longer prevents that, but it will prevent it from increasing or getting progress added. So the first time you use this, right when you're initiating combat, it's pretty straightforward. Queue up Sonic Shock first and then upload a bunch of other quick hacks and you'll notice no change to your trace upload. But after that first enemy is when things start getting a bit weird. When you already have a trace on you, you basically need to upload Sonic Shock first and let it finish uploading for it to actually prevent trace progress. So you can see here, if I upload Sonic Shock and try to queue a bunch of other quick hacks behind it, I'll immediately have my trace bar increase because the trace applies as soon as the quick hacks are added to the queue, but Sonic Shock doesn't kick in until it's fully uploaded. So instead, you basically have to upload Sonic Shock, stand there for a second to wait for it to complete, then you can upload a bunch more quick hacks and it won't impact trace. So fairly clunky to use with the new queue feature, and to me, the most fun way to use Sonic Shock right now is uploading it to everyone so you could be a true stealthy sniper. There was also a variety of quest changes from this update. Lots of players were unable to complete the quest I Can See You Clearly Now with Brendan the vending machine, because in previous versions of Cyberpunk 2077, it required 10 body to move this dumpster, which for a lot of you, if you're in the later half of the game, you may simply be unable to get your body stat that high. But with this update, that was changed to a mere 3 body, so now everyone can finish all of the quests. Riders of the Storm had a lingering bug where the chase cars would not actually attack you. That too was fixed with this update, and similarly, Sasquatch's jump attack wasn't dealing damage previously, but now it will. Biodyne Berserk got fixed, and this is pretty game-changing. Now the bonus you're supposed to get from its Reflexes attunement will actually apply. This Reflexes attunement will give you 1% more crit chance per point you have spent in the Reflexes attribute, which is pretty big. If you have a full 20 points in crit, the second you activate Berserk, you have a 20% higher chance to land a critical hit. Depending on your melee weapon build, you could definitely synergize this to become pretty overpowered. So definitely a huge buff to this specific Berserk depending on what type of character you're trying to play. Those were most of the balance or general changes to the game, but the real core of this update were many of the bug fixes that came with it. But maybe you also want to change up the balance of your bedroom. And if you do, check out today's video sponsor, Displate. They offer high quality metal posters that are easy to hang and even easier to swap out. And they just dropped a bunch of new Cyberpunk 2077 designs, several of which will bring the beauty of Phantom Liberty right to your bedroom. You can use my link down below to pick one up for yourself and potentially even get a bit of a discount. What'll very likely be the largest change to come from this update for a lot of players is around this new P-Core setting. This was a new option introduced with the last update, patch 2.11. By default, Cyberpunk 2077 would automatically allocate itself to some of the efficiency and performance cores on your CPU. But with this new setting, you could force the game to only use performance cores, which of course will maximize performance. Except unfortunately, for a lot of players with Intel CPUs, turning this setting on would lead to intense stutters, making the game functionally unplayable because you would just freeze every couple of seconds. But okay, not a huge deal, just don't turn the setting on, right? Well, sadly, no, because even if you left things on the default auto setting, you would still get a bunch of stutters. Not quite as bad as when you had P-cores enabled, but as you can see here, it was still absolutely brutal to play at points because you were stuttering so hard. I've been dealing with this in-game for the past month or so, and it has been absolutely brutal, with the only major workaround being some BIOS edits. But thankfully today that was resolved. I tested this for a couple of hours on both auto and with the P-core setting, and I had basically zero stutters. It was actually running incredibly smoothly. And now that I could actually test this feature, I did find that focusing on P-cores did yield a couple of extra FPS, nothing game-changing, but a slight performance boost. And I bet if your CPU bottlenecked, this will lead to an even larger increase in performance. We also got a big fix for Xbox players. That infinite save bug was resolved. This popped up recently, and basically saves on Xbox would just never complete. You would constantly have the icon for saving, and sometimes this could even occur when loading a save game, leading to a soft lock of the game where you would just be permanently loading and have to relaunch it. A relatively rare but brutal bug that was fixed is around invincible enemies. This has been in the game for a while now, where under some specific circumstances, certain groups of enemies would just become unkillable. So you would be forced to either run away from them or just quit the game altogether, because the only way to resolve this was a full relaunch. It's still not entirely clear what was actually causing this one, but thankfully today this was fixed properly. Some of the key binding issues were resolved with today's update as well. They fixed an issue where trying to bind the T key to actions in exploration and combat resulted in binding failed. It will now be possible to properly rebind the radio port and dropping bodies key on a AZERTY keyboard. So this was very unfortunate and kind of hilarious. With the introduction of the radio port in patch 2.1, the Z key became permanently bound to radio. So you couldn't change it. The Z key would always open the radio no matter what you did to the settings. And now if you're using an AZERTY keyboard, this becomes a disaster, because that is typically your primary walk key, the way you could walk forward. Except now you can't. Now you're just opening the radio and not walking forward. Thankfully, with today's update, CDPR removed the permanent binding and you have more flexibility with your key binding choices. Although one giant bug that wasn't fixed today is the mouse button keybind crash. Shortly after patch 2.11, lots of users found that they could not play the game. Sometimes they would crash from the start menu, other times they would get in game briefly, then crash. But the odd part about this was, even without mods or even after freshly installing the game, this problem would persist. So pretty quickly, users discovered that this was a byproduct of having certain keybinds, most notably by having dodge bound to your side mouse keys, like mouse button 4 or 5 would lead to crashing randomly. So sometimes you would be able to get into game, sometimes you couldn't even launch the game fully. And unfortunately, it seems like this still isn't fixed with this update. And in fact, as I was working on this video, I was separately trying to help somebody resolve their crashing issues that popped up today, until eventually I was like, oh, do you have your mouse keys bound? And yeah, that's why they were crashing constantly. After reading through a bunch of the posts, it seems like this is largely connected to Razer mice. There actually was a patch note around Razer Chroma, but it either was unrelated or wasn't fully fixed, because a lot of users are still reporting crashing issues here. And if you are too, just try resetting your keybinds, as that really seems to be a ultimate fix to this problem. A variety of other crash issues were also addressed with this update, as well as one major progress blocking bug with Solomon Reed's ending, where he just wouldn't call. And right now, Cyberpunk 2077 is kind of in an odd spot with updates. It feels like CDPR keeps running into this issue where they release what could be the final update, but then it has several bugs and they need to release a couple of more updates to resolve that. But then sometimes even the follow-up updates come with more bugs. As of right now, I haven't found any major bugs with patch 2.12, but who knows, maybe that'll change. And even still, this mouse keybind bug is pretty major. For some players, they literally just can't play the game without crashing. And I feel like what will make this much worse is just reinstalling the game won't actually fix that bug, because the keybinds will remain. That'll likely lead to a ton of user frustration, and I think CDPR will eventually have to hotfix this down the line. We know Cyberpunk 2077 is getting at least one more update whenever it gets FSR 3, but as of right now, we really have no idea when that may be coming, unless you're on PC, because if you are, you could actually download that right now. Check out this video to see the latest in Cyberpunk 2077 modding, including a new FSR 3 mod which may nearly double your performance in game.